Shalom. I am Rabbi Davidovich speaking to you on behalf of the webyeshiva.org, speaking to you from Efrat, Israel. I'm going to discuss one particular aspect from this week's Torah reading, which is Parsha Vayigash. And Parsha Vayigash talks about the reunification of Joseph and his brothers. And we remember that the brothers were jealous of Joseph, and when he was 17 years old, they threw him in a pit. They first wanted to kill him. They ended up selling him as a slave. Now, 22 years later, the brothers appear before Joseph, not knowing that this is Joseph because he's matured since then and grown a beard. They don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. And he wants to reveal himself to his brothers. 22 years away from his father, away from his family, away from his younger brother Benjamin. Both Benjamin and Yosef were the children of Rachel. Do you think he might have thought about taking revenge? And what kind of revenge did he do? The Torah portion teaches us that revenge isn't the answer. The answer, as taught to us in this Torah portion, and we'll go through it in just a moment, is if somebody harms you, not only shouldn't you have a grudge, but you shouldn't try to do to them what they did to you or more than what they did to you. And you should approach your brother at all times with love and concern. So how do we know that? So the Torah tells us, first of all, in this week's Parsha, it says, after the brothers were all gathered together and Joseph was looking at them, but all the Egyptians are present. So then the Torah says, Lo yochol Yosef lisapek l'chol hanitzovim alav, vayikra v'hotzi kol ish me'alav v'lo ish ito b'sfad Yosef. Joseph could not control himself before all the attendants who were there, and he said, everybody, all the Egyptians, all my attendants, leave this room. So there was nobody else present when Joseph made himself known to his brothers to tell them, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. And Rashi, on that sentence, says, why did he send anybody out of the room? It's a very important point. He says, V'lo yochol lisbol shiu mitzrayim mitzvavin olav shomim she'achav mevaishin v'odah. He did not want the Egyptians who were then in the room to hear what the brothers had done and therefore cause the brothers embarrassment. The concept of not embarrassing another person is so strong that even after 22 years of being an exile from his family, Yosef was particular not to try to embarrass his brothers. The Emek Davar says that he didn't want the Egyptians to understand that his brothers had really sold him into slavery and kidnapped him. He wanted them to think that he was kidnapped by some foreign nation, nothing to do with the brothers. Again, not to cause embarrassment. And then the Torah continues. It says, "Vayipol al tzavaro binyamin achiv, vayech v'binyamin boch al tzavaro." It says he then, after announcing who he was, when everybody's out of the room except his brothers, he then embraced his brother Benjamin around the neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. It's kind of a strange concept. And Rashi says that each one was crying crying about the destruction of the temples, the temple in Jerusalem, which was in uh, Benjamin's portion, and the Mishkan in Shiloh, which was in Joseph's portion. So they cried about these things, and the question is asked. Here they haven't seen each other for 22 years, and they're crying about something that's going to happen in the future. So the Rabbi Cheskel Kuzmir asks that question. He says, "Is this normal? That after not seeing your brother for 22 years, you're going to be worried about what's going to happen in the future, and not just have a time of great joy?" And he says, why was each one crying about the destruction of the temple and the Mishkan in the other person's territory? And he asks, he said, how did the sale of Joseph come about? It came about by sinas chinam, by hatred, baseless hatred. And at that point, they knew that baseless hatred would be something that would be continuing. It would result in the destruction of the holy temples. So they cried for that. And they cried for each other's. He says, because the way to correct baseless hatred is absolutely loving your fellow Jew without any reason for it. And havas chinam instead of sinas chinam, free love instead of free hatred. And then the Torah continues, has another strange pasuk, another strange sentence. It says, "Vayinashek l'chal echav, vayevch aleim v'achrei kein dibur echav ito." He said, the Torah says he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them, and only then were his brothers able to talk to him. The Shalach HaKadosh writes on that sentence, he says, see how much a person should forgive others. They sinned greatly against Joseph, and yet Joseph cried and kissed them. They should be asking forgiveness from Joseph, but Joseph turned the situation around and he appeased them. Yosef was so concerned about not embarrassing his brothers, not only in front of the Egyptians, but even when his father finally came back to Egypt. The Midrash says that Yosef was cautious never to be alone with his father. So his father wouldn't ask him, what happened all these years and how did you get in this situation? He did not want to embarrass his brothers in front of their father. And this is a great lesson that the Shem Mishmur writes. Every person has to be cautious not to speak badly of others. We so easily fall into the trap of Lashon Hara, saying bad things about anybody else, talking about other people. We have to focus. We have to focus on bringing together a world where we don't try to embarrass anybody else. We are always cognizant of the effects of our words and how we should, no matter what the situation, find it in our heart to certainly love our brothers, our relatives, our people who have done us wrong, and not to hold a grudge and seek revenge. So the revenge of Joseph was not the revenge that you think of when you hear that term. It was love and protection from embarrassment. And that's how we should treat one another. I thank everybody for listening on behalf of the webyeshiva.org, and I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbat, and I thank you for listening on behalf of the Web Yeshiva. Shabbat Shalom.